others today. There it goes. Let's see. Troy Thomas, are you the guest that David Moritz said was coming today? Oh, he left a chat. No, I'm not. Okay. Oh, okay. So Troy Thomas is a Boy Scout working on a merit badge requirement. And so he's listening in on our meeting today. So welcome, Troy. Thanks for coming.
This is Charles Barrett.
Oh, okay. Hi, Charles.
Hi.
Good to have you here today.
Yeah, I think I might be one of the guest speakers.
Yeah.
I know I am one of them. I don't know.
Yeah, George, I guess George had talked to you about doing something with us.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I think we all kind of, your name was floated at the last meeting, and we were pretty excited to maybe have you come on for the next conversation.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then I think that David told me that he had communicated with two farmers, a couple that have, I think, both previously been EPAC members, and they were interested in also being on the panel. So they're supposed to be joining us tonight as well. And then Mark, you had reached out to Tom Kay of the Alachua Conservation Trust. Do you know if he's planning to join us?
Yeah, sorry, I don't have audio connection, so I had to come in there. But I think I talked to Tom. He's got a board meeting tonight, but he said he'll try to enter on after if they finish up and he has time. I think so. Hopefully he'll be able to attend.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So it looks like everybody that we're expecting to be here is here. So we'll go ahead and start. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda and last month's minutes? And are there any changes, comments with regard to those two items? No? Okay, well then I guess we can hop right into our I don't think he knows that he's not muted.
Yes.
We have
Mark, can you mute your mic?
Bettina, hold on a minute. Hold on, Bettina. What's that?
Are you talking to Bettina?
Yes.
Oh, is she? Oh, okay.
She's trying to get on. I don't know if she has.
If she's able to call in.
Yeah, I don't know if she is. Let me check something here. Bettina, are you able to call in? Are you calling in? Okay. All right. So are you on there now?
Okay,
you got
well,
the agenda, right? You looking at the agenda? Okay.
Do we have new members to welcome
You open
today?
the agenda. You open the agenda, and there's a link.
Oh, I
underneath
wasn't
and you
aware
look up the agenda.
of potentially new members being here today. Let's see.
Okay. No problem.
I looked at the list of people and recognized all but Troy Thomas is a Boy Scout who's here on to fulfill a merit badge requirement. And then DMC
That's
Sherry, I'm not
December-
aware of who that
That's
is.
December McSherry, Lee
That's
and December McSherry, the farmers who used to be on EPAC.
Okay, oh, perfect. Okay, so yeah, so no new members. It doesn't look like anybody here would be a new member. All right, so let's go ahead and start, and hopefully Bettina will be able to join us later. So the next community conversation, it's going to be around agriculture and the impacts of climate change, and kind of discussing that from the angles of somebody that's an environmentalist, somebody who's on the research end, and then somebody who's actually works as a farmer, was the template that we've kind of been discussing. And we're shooting for April as potentially the month to have the conversation. And so several people have reached out to potential panelists, and a lot of them are here today. We have, is it December McSherry?
Yes.
Yes, who's here with us, who I think with her husband are both farmers and former members of EPAC. And then we have Dr. Barrett is with us today. And then potentially Tom Kay will join us later. And so I don't know, do we want to just maybe have those guests who are here with us today introduce themselves and kind of what they do or what they might want to bring to the panel?
I think
Yes.
that's a good way to start, Nisha.
So how about Dr. Barrett?
All righty. I'm Charles Barrett.
That was your intro music.
Yeah.
Oh. Does anybody know what that is? Can everybody who's not talking mute their mic? Maybe that'll get rid of it.
It's feedback from someone's computer.
So let's see, who's not muted?
I think
Unmute
that's done.
locally.
All right. I'm Charles Barrett. I'm with the University of Florida. I work in extension. And what that means is I help to extend the research and educational materials produced at the university out into the community.
Awesome, thanks. And then December McSherry, do you mind introducing yourself briefly? She might not be in front of the computer at the moment or something, so we'll just circle back. All right, so has anybody had any thoughts with respect to the conversation since we last discussed it last month? Or any new ideas? We also had Kelly All from the Swanee River Partnership speak to us last month, and she could also potentially be a good panelist to have, or somebody from the Swanee River Partnership, since that organization works with or includes like a variety of different people and works around agriculture as well.
Nisha?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to hear both from Dr. Barrett and from Lee and December McSherry, on their, their individual takes on, what we're putting together. We want to basically have a community conversation about climate change and, how it's going to be affected by, how it's going to affect agriculture, and, if there are changes that agriculture needs to make, or there are some that are going to be especially problematic, et cetera, and go along that line with it. And I think to that extent, we can ask questions, but I think at this point in time, they're probably the best suited to, tell us what their take on all this is. Also, I noticed that Leslie Straub has joined us as well. And if when we have some time at the end of our dealing with for community conversation, we can listen to her for a few minutes. I think it would be helpful.
I think it also might be instructive. This is George. I've talked with Charles several times since our last meeting and suggested to him that he give the give the committee a short overview of the programs that he's involved with, so that, because he's more on the ground than Kelly, and so he does the research and does the extension out with the growers, and so he can tell us about some of the specific programs that he's working with the growers, and also some of the education programs that he shares with the other county agents in the region. So I think he's prepared to give us a short presentation, and then that might lead to some general questions. And I also told Charles that we would be interested in having his thoughts. We need to give him a little better overview of what we're planning in April, so that he can have some give us some thoughts about where we're going, and how he might even particularly play a role.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, Scott.
So I've been absent, but it might be helpful for others. Could you kind of give us a summary of what the goal is and what the focus of the conversation will be, so that I and maybe others will have a better understanding?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the gist of it, I think I kind of just said, but it was very general. I don't know how much we've sharpened it up, but the idea is to discuss the impacts of climate change on agriculture, and the way that agriculture is potentially impacting climate change, and to include the perspective of different demographics involved in that equation, be it farmers, environmentalists, people working on the research side of things. Let's see. I think, the impetus for this conversation came from our last community conversation, where things kind of tended to gravitate towards a discussion of agriculture. And so it just seemed like the logical next step to pick up that from that, and to kind of look at it, with a closer lens in a discussion format. I don't know, is there anything like any more specific kind of question that you had about that? That's the gist of it, as far as I'm aware. If anybody else feels like there's something I'm leaving out.
No, that's helpful. I guess I didn't know if we were, I mean, there's, as with everything climate change, it's extremely broad. And so I didn't know if we were, there's obviously very significant water quantity aspects. There's, carbon sequestration. It's very broad, even just within agriculture. So,
Right.
I didn't know if it was any more nailed down than that.
No,
But
yeah,
Nisha,
yes.
sorry. So we were talking about the Swanee River Partnership for Scott. Scott, that's for your info, the Swanee River Partnership. And I guess that's a coalition of, I think more than 50 entities, and they comprise farmers, researchers, environmental organizations, extension agents, etc., etc. And I believe they do focus on water issues, irrigation, and also on fertilizer issues. So those are the main areas they work on, and that's in the Santa Fe River Basin and the Swanee River Basin, I believe.
So I mean, I guess what I was maybe running into is I am a bit concerned that there is there's a bit of a business as usual kind of viewpoint from a lot of the interest groups, and so I would be a bit concerned if we have people that are like, oh, we're going to just keep doing what we're doing and we're doing a good enough job, or we're going to make changes around the edges. I mean, that's one of the things we've talked about a lot of times, I think, with climate change, is just that, like, we actually need to do big things. Things need to actually drastically change. The science bears out that minor nibbling around the edge is not going to be enough to solve our problems.
Well, I think the basic question several meetings ago was, are the farmers doing anything? Is agriculture doing anything? Is there anybody working with agriculture? We need to find somebody that's working with agriculture. And I mentioned that the Swanee River Partnership was set up almost 20 years ago, because I was in the original meeting in Tallahassee to formulate what was the predecessor to the Swanee River, what is now the Swanee River Partnership. So we agreed as a committee that we would bring in somebody that works with the Swanee, and that was Kelly. And now my mind is thinking, okay, well, now we're sort of drilling down towards the community conversation, and we want to know something more specific about the research and the extension programs and the outreach programs for farmers in the Swanee and the Santa Fe basins. So that's why Charles was invited to visit with us today. And my understanding, Scott, is that we're still sort of formulating, number one, our understanding as a committee about what is going on with the farmers, what kinds of programs are on the ground to help farmers adopt best management practices. And secondly, are there some speakers that can engage with the audience at the community conversation? So I think the answer with some of your questions is going to come when we listen to Charles and what they're doing, because there are things on the ground. It might be going slower than some people might like to see. It might be, there are issues. There always is. I've been affiliated with this whole issue since 1980, if you want to know the truth. So that's my understanding of where the committee was trying to grapple with this issue and formulate it into something that would make a good community conversation.
I mean, I guess that's my concern, though, is I'm a little bit worried about getting fed the line of, best management practices are the be all end all, and we're doing a great job and all the problems are solved. And reality, which virtually every climate scientist says that nothing we are doing is anywhere close to enough. And we need to be talking about radical change, and best management practices, no offense to people that work on them, are not radical change. They're nibbling around the edges. And I mean, once again, a lot of this comes back down to food should be priced accordingly to its actual impact on the environment and on people.
Well, let me make a suggestion here. Maybe we let the questions that you're asking might be more appropriate to ask of Charles and anybody else that's going to speak to us tonight after they, talk to us, make a presentation. Let's see what Charles and his team are doing.
Yeah, and I would also add, and David, I'll get to you right after that. I'll also add that, after I agree, we should listen to the presentations and kind of soak in what these potential panelists have to say. And but if you feel like afterwards, like we're still missing a more radical voice, or somebody who's kind of thinks, we need to go further with things. If it doesn't feel like a well-rounded panel in that sense, we can always add somebody else to kind of have that voice. So yeah, David.
Yeah, I think George hit it on, did a much better job than I could have ever done, filling in some of the spaces there. But basically, I think we are in kind of a mode where we're going to be learning a lot tonight, and we'll be learning more next month and probably formulating some of the final steps of what we need to do to put the panel together in next month, and then we'll continue to learn. We'll learn from the panel when it actually takes place. I also invited Leah and December McSherry because they are farmers and they have they're out in the field every day. They know what what changes need to be done. They're very progressive and very much aware of climate change problems and issues, and I think they're going to be they'll also be very helpful from a standpoint of filling us in on where we may need to go in terms of changes to farming practices. So with that, I would suggest then that we go first to Dr. Barrett and then on to the McSherrys and have them do presentations for us.
Yeah, so Bettina, we'll
Yeah.
get to you and then we'll go on to the presentations.
Yeah, so just very briefly, Scott, I hear you. And I had a few times mentioned to at least get an organic farmer to speak us. So we are at the topic of farming right now. I mean, that's what we decided on. And I also think, yes, we need to hear about, what the Swanee River Partnership is doing and all these farmers. I'm sure they do good stuff, but I also would like to hear some other people, for example, organic farmers or whatever you have in mind, Scott. So maybe we can discuss that after we hear the presentations. Yeah.
Thanks, Bettina. Okay, so we can go ahead and Dr. Barrett, sorry, I keep forgetting your first name, Charles Barrett, if you want to go ahead and start your presentation.
Sure, I think somebody will just have to give me the permission to share my screen and I'll go into it. I think it says Mark Brown as the host.
Yeah, Mark, can you?
Oh, okay, I can. Oh, he started sharing his screen. Or somebody did.
Yeah, that's Mark's screen. He's sharing his screen.
Yeah, he needs to stop sharing his screen so I can share mine.
Yeah. There we go.
All righty. I'm not sure what you guys are seeing, if you're seeing the PowerPoint or you're seeing the PowerPoint presentation mode.
I'm seeing it with, I can see like the
black with
slide
the
one,
notes
slide
and
1 of
stuff.
18, and yeah.
Yeah. All right. 1 second. Did it again. Well, there we go. How's that?
That's great.
Good deal. All righty. So Scott, I share some of your concerns. I don't think we're ever going to address climate change without some serious changes. I'll just go into this PowerPoint and kind of be brief, but what my focus is not climate change. It's not, it's just not focused on climate change. I'm focused on the here and now, the shorter term kind of boots on the ground things that we see in our basin. We have the basin management action plans and we have minimum flows and levels. So my focus is on water and nutrient conservation. So basically increased efficiencies in agriculture. And so that does go along that same thread as climate change. If we're being more efficient in agriculture on all the inputs and diesel and things that we're using, we should reduce our carbon footprint. We should have a less impact on climate change. And so while they're running in the same direction, I won't say they're exactly the same. So take what I'm saying with that frame and understand that I'm not a climate change expert. What I am good at is what I'm about to show you is working with farmers. And this is a picture of me doing a small field day out on a cabbage farm. And this is how you make change happen with the farmers that I'm used to working with. So I'm going based on what George asked me to talk about today, kind of give a current update of what the crops in the Santa Fe and Swanee basins look like. There's a lot of hay, pasture, corn, and peanuts in the basin. You also have a considerable footprint of vegetables and watermelon. And then I kind of almost have them in order, not really, but then you've got some snap beans, cotton, tobacco, and silviculture. And so that's pretty much off the top of my head what's being produced right now. And when you look at that aerial map, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of square fields that are pretty much hay and pasture. And then you've got some pivots with corn and peanuts. We do a lot of corn and peanuts out in this area. And so that's kind of the ballpark. That's what we're looking at, y'all. Basin management action plans are either pending or have been adopted. They have been adopted for Santa Fe. The Swanee has been adopted, but there's still a challenge that's pending. And the latest update on that is we're still waiting to hear what the final verdict is going to be on that. Regardless of what that turns out to say, we're already working with agriculture on reducing nitrogen loads in the basin. So these two, this table on the left, the table 9 total reduction, this is cut from the Santa Fe BMAP. The total load reduced is close to 2 million pounds that we need to reduce in the basin. On the Swanee side of things, it's about double that or a little over double that. We're at 4 million. And so the top table 7 gives you a inside the spring sheds. And then this is the total inside and outside here, the 4 million pounds. So you got 2,200,000 within spring sheds and then 1.8 outside of spring sheds for a total of 4 million pounds that needs to be reduced to get to the total maximum daily load. And so how do you do that? How do you get to this? And why did I highlight these two, the Withlacoochee in red? I'm going to tell you a story later on in this presentation about a big project that we did in the Withlacoochee. And just remember that number on the Withlacoochee is in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's right here, 340,000 pounds. Just remember that, and we'll keep moving forward. So how you do it, there's no substitute for hard work when it comes to agriculture, and it doesn't matter if you're producing your own food or if you're helping producers that produce food. So that's what I do. I help the producers. What we do is things like what you see here, digging these big pits and showing them where their roots are and why it's important to place fertilizer by the row. Well, by showing them where their roots are at, you might think with a corn crop, you've got this huge root system, and corn does have a big root system, but it's still vulnerable to nutrient leaching, just like any other crop in these sandy soils. And George has a quote at the bottom of his email. If you're lucky enough to get an email from George, it says that water's everything, and he's 100% right. I come from the same school of thought, and in our sandy soils, especially our forms of nitrogen that we're using, become soluble very quickly, and they move very, very fast in our sandy soils. So this is just a quick picture to show. It's hard work. We're digging holes out in fields, and then we're getting on tractors, and this is one of my main partners, Joel Love, on a little small tractor, putting fertilizer, doing 2 rows at a time. It took us just over a day to do 10 acres with this little tractor. And this is what it looks like when you're out in the field flying a drone, watching your buddy put fertilizer out. But what we were able to do was show this farmer how much fertilizer they could reduce by using this technique. This is an old school technique, and this is an old school piece of equipment. These are the things that were done back, you know, I don't know, ever since farming became a thing. Fertilizer was put by the plant. Native Americans used to put a fish by a plant, you know. This is old school technology, but how can we make this? How can we scale this up onto the size of a farm that we have nowadays? The thing about agriculture is that for a lot of our farmers to be able to make money, the scale that they have to be at because of the economies of scale has to be big on a crop like corn, where there's a very thin profit margin. You have to grow a lot of it to make money to make ends meet. And so how can we take this slow piece of equipment and scale it up? We do something like this. We work with the farmer. He purchased this piece of equipment. It's a $75,000 piece of equipment. He got cost share for it. And in the first year, he was able to save a considerable amount of fertilizer. I think he came down 30 pounds per acre on 5,000 acres. Well, that was a big difference. What we were then able to do was work with him, because the issue with this first year was that by knifing this fertilizer into the ground, which is a good practice, you reduce volatilization, but he had to go slow because he was knifing it in. He was worried about getting too close and cutting his roots. We showed him another technique that he applied in his second year here, which are these Y drops. If you notice, he changed, it's the same rig, he just changed these fittings down here at the end for these Y drops. And what that does is it dribbles liquid nitrogen by the row. Instead of knifing it in, now he's dribbling it right next to the crop. And these are some more images to kind of give you a better look, a closer look at what it's doing. Well, he was able to speed up his tractor. Now, instead of on the first year, he was only able to reduce a little bit of fertilizer because it took so much time. He was only able to make one pass. On the second year with these Y drops, he came down to a full 50 pounds. And this close-up shot, you can see where the liquid nitrogen is being dribbled right next to the row. All that fertilizer, we're giving it the best chance of being taken up by the plant. He was able to come down 250,000 pounds of nitrogen. That is a behavior change. That's not a 1 year change. That's a forever from now on change. That's huge. 250,000 pounds. That was in that Withlacoochee Basin that I highlighted, that red box, saying that we needed 340,000 pounds reduced in that basin. We just got 250,000 with one farm. That's a big impact. This is a huge success story. This is what spurred the project that I think Kelly All was talking to you all about when she spoke to you at your last meeting. And it led to this project. This project's got a lot of support from both the ag industry and from our conservation partners. I also am a member of the Swanee River Partnership, and what we're purchasing with the big project is one of these large high boy sprayers, is what it's called. It's a sprayer that's been modified with these Y drops on it to dribble the nitrogen by the row, which can save anywhere from 20 to 40% of your fertilizer. Our goal is to go to 3 large farms, do one whole pivot on each farm each year for 5 years, for a total of 15 farms. We're targeting our largest 15 corn growers. And you wonder, why are you focusing on corn? Corn is one of our, it's not the biggest footprint in the basin, but it's a big footprint in the basin. And it's one of the highest input users. It uses a lot of water, and it uses a considerable amount of fertilizer. So what we're able to do on corn can get us those large reductions like we saw in that previous slide, and get us to those nitrogen load reductions that we need for the basin. That's why we targeted corn. I think I figured it out before. If we reduce 50 pounds of nitrogen applied on 50,000 acres of corn, which is more or less where we're at, we're already pretty close to that 4 million load reduction. We're over halfway there. So this is a step in the right direction. This is a big change. It's a paradigm shift. So that's what we're working on for that first, this big project. What else am I doing? What else do I deal with every single day? Soil moisture sensors. So that was the first part of this presentation, focused mainly on water quality. The second half of this presentation is focused on water quantity. What are we doing to save water? So this is that same farmer that we worked with to reduce the nitrogen application. He already had soil moisture sensors, so I was able to work with him and teach him how to better make use of the data that he's collecting. And he was able to save 200 million gallons of water. This isn't an estimate. I estimated that very conservatively that he had saved 180 million gallons of water. And I went back and partnered with the water management district and looked at his well data. We got his pumping information from the water management district because he's enrolled in the monitoring program, like all large farmers have to be. And we actually confirmed it with the data that he actually saved 200 million gallons of water using soil moisture sensors on his corn crop. He saw a drastic improvement in his crop. The aquifer saw less water being pumped and less nutrient loss. And so it was a big win. How do we do it? I like to talk about soil moisture sensors and give kind of a taste, a little bit of the flavor of what we're doing. Basically what I do is I install these sensors here. It's on a probe. I've taken the outer cover off so that you can see where the sensors are and they line up to a line on my graph. It's a pretty rudimentary system, super basic, but it works very, very well. And then we install it in the root zone to where we can see crop water uptake. And what I do is I teach people to read the lines, and I'll show you guys real quick why this is effective, because I feel like if you understand the technology, you'll understand that this is what's being put out in the farms and why it is so effective. And so I'll just say that I can show you where your root zone is by looking at this graph and saying, well, where is my water uptake occurring? Well, during the day, I have a decrease in moisture in the soil. That's root water uptake. At night, we don't have the transpiration taking place. So we have less water loss or less root water uptake at night, much less. And then during the next day, boom, water starts being taken up again. And so the next night, nothing, and then an irrigation event. Now what I can do is say, okay, you irrigated, this black line's at 4 inches, this red line's at 8 inches. I can just barely see a little bit of roots down on that red line. I would say that this irrigation event was okay. I don't want to start seeing an increase down here, down below my root zone. So I would say that this is an acceptable irrigation depth. And then you can see this little arrow just points out over here, this irrigation event looks like they started to irrigate and then turned it off. And then we had a rainfall and then it was a good thing to turn it off because the rain took us down to where our root zone is. And so another tool that's built into these sensors is we can measure water uptake, and we can use this root water uptake to tell us if we need to make an irrigation event, if we're starting to get behind on the crop. And I'm going in fast forward gear now, just because you guys don't probably need to use so much sensors every day, so I don't want to bore you to death. But you can see how over time, if I look at these call outs where we have root water uptake at 4 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches, 16 inches. You can watch the crop grow its roots over time. Knowing that helps us match our irrigation to crop growth. It helps us maintain adequate moisture levels so that we don't over irrigate or under irrigate. We don't leach our nutrients. All these things can be done by knowing where our root zone is. You can see this A arrow is a big heavy rainfall event. This is Mother Nature. We have no control over that. But B is an irrigation event where we do have control and we can minimize nutrient loss by only irrigating where we have roots. What does this translate to? How does this translate into water savings on a farm? This was a phone call that a colleague of mine got, said, hey, I've got watermelons and I'm about to turn on the center pivot because my drip irrigation's not putting out enough water. Can you help? My colleague calls me, says, hey, Charles, help me help this grower make a change to save some water, but also to do a better job of irrigating. What we have right here is 2 irrigation events a day. You can see the 2 big humps. And then we switched them over to 3 irrigation events a day, but at a reduced amount of time. And what was happening was early on, they were given 2 hours at each event. So 4 hours of irrigation a day. What this was doing was pushing too much water down here on this green line, this bottom line. That's at 20 inches. It's pretty deep for a watermelon root. And we don't want to move that line very much. We don't need to put a lot of water down there. We don't have a lot of water uptake from there getting into our watermelons. What did we do? We switched it out to 3 shorter irrigation events. We saved 1 hour a day. So from 2 2-hour events, we went to 3 1-hour events. So from 4 hours to 3 hours. And really my suggestion was to go to 45 minutes, but that was a little out of the comfort zone for the farmer, which was fine because they were okay anyway. They weren't moving this green line very much. And what happened was we were able to flatline and stay up with the crop water demand. Instead of here, where this red arrow is, we were getting behind and we were under irrigating, which we were going to lose the crop. I hate losing crop because any water or nutrients or any other inputs that you put into a crop and then for you to lose it, that's all wasted time, wasted money, wasted efficiency. And so we were able to save 7 million gallons of water on this farm in 13 days, which is pretty good. Every little chunk like this adds up. When you consider the amount of water that we're saving on these farms and you think, well, okay, what does that relate to? And so like the city of Gainesville's consumptive use permit is, even though they don't use a full 25 million gallons of water a day, that's what their consumptive use permit says they can use. So this is a good chunk of that, almost a third of 1 day's worth of water for the city of Gainesville. What I've been able to do is accumulate some funds to purchase a ton of soil moisture sensors that I distribute with my agents. This is a county agent down here in southeast Florida. I have sensors all over the state. It's grown from 2018, just around here in the Swanee Valley and in the Santa Fe. And then we just expanded. And so we're putting sensors out all over the state, saving water on farms. It's been a passion of mine. I love the soil moisture sensors. I feel like that is the direction of the future. We've got a lot of farmers that are really trying to adopt this technology. We've got cost share from FDACs and most of the water management districts to help support that. It's a cheap way to save a lot of water. And we're talking pennies per gallons, which is, same thing with the fertilizer program that we're doing. When you compare that to saving water in cities, it's a lot more money to save a gallon of water in a city or to reduce nitrogen loading from a wastewater treatment plant. It's a lot more money to upgrade a wastewater treatment plant to advanced wastewater treatment than it is to make these changes out on farms. So that's why I believe in what we're doing. And I'll stop there and hopefully there's some good questions.
Yeah, Charles, I have one question real quickly. I'm just curious if there's any sensor that will actually tell you, how well fertilized the plants are. You just have to gauge how well the plants are themselves.
Yeah, so the best way to tell is to look at the plant tissue or some crops. Dr. George has developed petiole sap tests. So there's tests like that. We do have EC capacity on most of these soil moisture sensors, but that's just salt. It doesn't tell you anything other than electrical conductivity. And so the best way, it's you want to get a good look at what the crop is doing, you measure the crop itself. So take a tissue sample or petiole sap if you got it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. That was interesting. I like the soil moisture sensor stuff. I guess I'll start by saying I'm not. I may have come off as kind of anti-ag, which is not the case. I think farmers actually see climate change a lot more than other groups of people because they deal with the weather day in and day out, and so extreme events and things like that are a bit more obvious to them than they are to the rest of us that sit inside air-conditioned homes all day. I guess one of my main questions is, it seems like pretty much all of the work that your group does, a huge amount of the work that FDACS does, a huge amount of the work that the districts do is, and this word is never well received, but is subsidizing agriculture. And so if I go and I buy a watermelon at Publix for $5, the bottom line is I'm paying $5 for something that should cost $10.
Yeah.
And it seems like one of the biggest problems is just that our prices we pay for agricultural goods do not reflect their actual value.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it seems like it would actually be better for farmers if they were charging more for their products and that those prices actually reflected the value of the items that they were selling. I mean,
Yeah.
The bottom line is, like, through these TMDLs and these BMAPs and these cost share programs and through the Springs funded projects, we're essentially paying more for watermelons, more for beef, more for milk than what we actually pay at the register in the store. And so I'm curious if you've thought about that, if you've talked to farmers about that, and is there anything being done to essentially fix that? Because that honestly feels like the base problem here.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of the problem, what you pick up on. The thing that most folks don't understand, it's farmers are price takers. They're not price makers. So that's all the price making is done in the market. I think that, paying a fair price for food is a start, but then you disproportionately affect folks that are already challenged in meeting their dietary needs. And so folks that don't have enough money already to purchase healthy food, well, they're going to be marginalized even more now if we raise the price of these foods. And so that's a whole social dilemma that is not my expertise, and I'll not talk anymore about that. But I mean, we don't pay the true price for food. I think the way I look at it from the water conservation and nutrient conservation efforts that the state's doing is that these basin management action plans that we have are not just agriculture's problem. It's society's problem. When you look at the nitrogen source inventory loading tool, whatever, INSILT, in the basin management action plan, you find that in most of these rural areas, yes, agriculture is the largest player. We have the largest amount of load to reduce. Normally somewhere, I think the Santa Fe was somewhere around 75 to 80% of the nitrogen load reduction needs to come from agriculture. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it using the techniques that I just mentioned. But there's atmospheric deposition. There's treated wastewater. There's septic tanks. There's all these other human anthropogenic sources that we have to address. Well, it's a lot cheaper. So my final point was, it's a lot cheaper, dollars per pounds removed, to spend that money in a situation like agriculture. I don't know of another land use where it's as cheap or as effective to spend your money to get the nitrogen and water reductions. I haven't seen the data. There's no data available. We can compare it. We can compare it to advanced wastewater treatment. Advanced wastewater treatment's expensive. It works for sure, but this is just the best I know. And if somebody shows me something better, I think it's that's where our tax dollars should go. But for right now, this is what we got.
I guess the tricky thing though is it seems like we're essentially making the bank shot instead of the direct shot here, which is farmers would naturally reduce their fertilizer input. They would be incentivized if fertilizer was twice as expensive, and then they were getting twice as much for the product they were producing.
Yep.
Like, I mean, that's my concern is your social issue, like you shouldn't solve one problem by creating an incredibly complex black box, machine that's going on behind. We're essentially making it impossible to tell how much we pay for food. Like the fact that, they cost share this equipment to put down fertilizer, like that's better than nothing, but it's far from the best. The best would just be like, hey, nitrogen is no longer $3 a pound, it's $7 a pound. And the end result of that would be that the cost of food would go up. And that's fine. The cost of food should go up. People would waste less if food was more expensive. Like that's just a fact. And so that's my real concern, I guess, with all of this. And, like you said, it is definitely some of the more cost-effective water quantity and water quality work that can be done. That is largely, though, because of how inefficient it was.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is those efficiencies come at huge cost reduction, right? Like I can broadcast nutrients a lot faster, a lot cheaper, use different sources, and scream through the field. That's what we're changing them away from, right? To get these efficiencies, it's what you're describing is right. That is a different approach to solve the problem. But I have to work in the right now. You're talking about policy change, and you're talking about the future much further down the road than what I'm talking. I'm talking about what can I do right now to have an impact. This is what I can do. This is what we are doing in agriculture. I'm not going to disagree with you. The price of food is too low. Like I said, that's a whole nother debate. But where we're at right now as a society that's a huge issue. You know what I mean? A lot of things are affected by that. You have to pay workers a decent living wage. You want to get into that to be able to afford the food, and so that's 50, 60. I don't know how many years down the road that is.
If I can make a comment here, the one thing that perhaps you're not thinking about, Scott, is that food prices are controlled by the Chicago Board of Trade. Now that's public, privately owned, I guess, but it's a mechanism that's in place that says, okay, here's how much people are going to pay for hay or for corn or for anything specifically, and how do you change that? Government can't just go ahead and say tell people in private enterprise, you can't do business this way, you've got to do it that way, when it's as set in place as the market is. I mean, you're talking about saying, okay, well, the stock market, you can't trade tomorrow or the next week or whatever. I mean, it would just shut down a huge amount of industry. That would be a problem. And
it should be a free market.
Yeah,
it should be a free market. It's the bottom line. It shouldn't be a controlled market. Like,
I agree.
that's the problem.
just saying, how do you get around that right now when if people want to actually get their food in stores where it can be sold at all right now, they have to use that mechanism. I agree we should approach that, but that's going to be a secondary thing. The other thing is if you just raise the prices of food instead of doing the increases through subsidies, what then happens is people who are very poor can't afford food, and you have to subsidize them in some way, and that becomes a problem when we've seen our government recently completely cut food stamps to people across the table, so that the very poor aren't going to be getting fed at all. And right now there's a lot of people that are used to be middle class who aren't eating just because of COVID-19, and the cost of food for them is is still relatively cheap, but they can't pay for it because they're not having income at all. So, there's got to be some kind of a middle ground to find in that. And I think we do have to deal with that issue as well, as, having a direct pricing of food change. But to
Once
just
again,
say we're going
though,
to raise.
I mean,
Go ahead.
you're talking about making a triple bank shot here. You could just give people that need money for food, and there are programs to do that, WIC, among others. That being said, instead, you are essentially fixing the price of food, and then you are having to bank the ball off a wall where you subsidize the cost of fertilizer, because you're then having to give the water management districts money from the state to pay to take the fertilizer out of the water where it was put in excess in the first place. And so you're like, it is the most efficient way to solve a problem is always to directly solve the problem, not solve
I
it
agree.
after it's become an issue. It's a lot harder to take things out after they have been put in, is the bottom line.
Yeah.
And so if a farmer, if a farmer had a more direct, the bottom line is the reason it makes sense to speed through a field and dump too much fertilizer is fertilizer is too cheap. And the farmer is not realizing the actual cost of that fertilizer, and the consumer is not realizing the cost of that fertilizer. So I mean, that's, once again, like, I'm a little bit concerned from a climate change standpoint that we are talking about way too little to make a difference. Like,
I don't think anyone or most people are not opposed to what you're proposing, but to expect major changes to occur as fast as you seem to want them is a draconian approach that you can't even get state legislatures to be willing, or the US Congress to be willing to fund what is needed to help people in desperate situations right now through this pandemic. To expect it in an to restructure agricultural economics, that's monumental.
But George, he's right. We need to.
we have no choice.
I agree.
We have no choice. Like,
we have to do it, but I defy anyone to come up with a way that will be passed by government, by state legislatures, and by the federal government.
They have to do it. They have to. It's simply someone has to take the bull by the horns, the saying goes, and make the change. Okay, and how they do it is going to be critical to how far they can get with it. And but there may be intermediate stages. I'm just saying we need to consider all of the ramifications of this. Not that it shouldn't go that way. Okay, not that it doesn't need to be done. And I think the fact that you're going to have to tear apart the market and make it work differently,
Sure.
and you're going to have to change the pricing of food and how food is delivered to stores and all that. That's huge. But hey, the problem is a huge problem and has to be solved.
And Charles, the thing I will say is, like, that is, your presentation on soil moisture sensors is the best one I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And I've
great.
been to a ton of water resources conferences, and that's by far the best presentation I've ever seen on soil
Wow.
moisture sensors and the actual value of using those at different levels. That was an amazing presentation from that standpoint. And obviously this is not directed at you. These are issues that I might have brought up in previous meetings that I attended.
And
Oh,
bless,
yeah, this
bless
is
your
good
staff.
conversation.
We're happy to have you.
And I think, just going back to the community conversation, the point of that conversation, is largely awareness of the issue. And we would be remiss not to, bring up Scott's like point and make people aware of that during the conversation as well. And if we just, I mean, I like the idea of, you know, of having the component where we're talking about the solutions that exist now and the ways that we can make changes and have positive impacts, and, you know, just the efficiency of the solutions that were just discussed is amazing. I wasn't aware of how drastically you could improve things with such relatively simple solutions. That's, you know, that's really awesome and encouraging. And I think that deserves to be a component. But yeah, we also do need to have that bigger picture, you know, made aware at the conversation as well.
It's dinner time in my household, as I'm sure you can tell.
By the way, I was trying to say before is, you know, we have Scott here, and he brings up and makes the hard questions for us and all that. And bless you, Scott, I love it. Please keep doing it, okay? Because we need that. And I agree. We need to have that component as well when we have this discussion on the conversation, because, you know, the fact that what has to be done to fix all of this is so difficult to do shouldn't enter into the fact that it's what we must do. It's the right thing to do, and it's perhaps the only way we're going to get to where we need to go as far as addressing climate change problems.
And I think what Nisha mentioned is actually, I think that would be a very good way to structure it. And maybe you guys have already headed down this path, but it seems like it would be helpful to have a person that is thinking I really hope it's not 20 years down the road or 50 years down the road, but hopefully the person that is thinking about the big solutions that are needed, and then also discussing the current practical solutions that are being made, because obviously both are very necessary. Like, the problems are bigger than the current solutions that are out there, and there will need to be bigger changes made. That being said, you know, 20 million gallons left in the aquifer is 20 million, or 200 million gallons left in the aquifer is 200 million gallons left in the aquifer. That's a good thing. And both are very important. So I think balancing those two in the community conversation would be very valuable.
Agreed. What we need to do is we need to find someone to voice that opinion too, you know, Scott. So I mean, that's going to be the difficult part there. So do we want to move ahead to the next discussion in the McSherry's?
Sure. And yeah, I mean, in the meantime, everybody can maybe be thinking about what kind of person, or if they have a specific person in mind who could potentially fill in that role of the, you know, that bigger picture role that Scott was discussing. So yeah,
Lee,
you go ahead, David.
I was going to say, Lee and or December, whoever we have there, can you first give us, you know, an idea of how you farm, what you farm, you know, and how you're impacted by all of this, you know, that you know, the idea of cutting back on water, cutting back on fertilizer. I don't think you guys use fertilizer, if I remember correctly, but you know, tell us how you think, you know, things need to go for you know, the changes that need to be made for farming in Florida for us to you know, to reach the goals we're going to, these incredibly difficult goals we need to reach for climate change.
Am I heard? Is anybody hearing me?
Yeah, I hear you, Lee. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, David, and pleased to be here. Thank you to George Hockmuth and Charles Barnett. I've been to their extension station up north there, and they're doing terrific work. And you have to think about what George Hockmuth and Charles Barnett and their colleagues are doing. They're fixing the airplane while it's flying. And you know, that's tremendous work. And my view, just to get into the macro picture for 1 second, our view, there are no big solutions. It's 100,000 small solutions. It's 500 guys, 500,000 people like George Hockmuth and Charles Barnett in all fields, just not agriculture. That's how it's going to work. Now, about us, we've been on our farm for 46 years, and we've pursued every kind of agricultural business opportunity you can imagine. every 5 years, we're changing crops. We're running 2, 3, 4 different kinds of businesses within our farm at a time. Right now, we're kind of slowed down a little, having hit the young age of 70 and sold our cattle herd a couple years ago, which our sons are moving back. All this is going to get fired up again. I can see it coming. And they've actually proposed some new enterprises for our farm. But one thing we've been thinking about and is in the future, it would be great to feed into the system a lot more small farms. Because what you have to understand is if there's climatic events, these surges of bad weather, which likely will get worse, and maybe the Swanee Basin gets flattened when you're in a hurricane. We get one of them 40-inch rains that seem to be showing up. 5% crop loss is a disaster to a population. You don't need to lose 50% of your food to have a disaster. And if you have a certain resiliency built in with lots of small farms, like where we live, we're kind of the biggest farm around. There's a few around us as well, but there's a lot of 5 and 10 acre homesteads. Some of these homesteads have been in place since right after the Civil War. And these people have worked these small farms forever. And the production rises and falls with economics, with social pressures, things like that. Wages are good in town. You're down to a kitchen garden and a few cows and a few goats, and you will go to work in town. If jobs thin out in town, you find people gearing up for farms. But we have cleared fields, we have fenced fields, we have sheds with equipment waiting under it just to be fixed up and ready to go again. So my view is we need to have more small build resilience into the system. The guys Charles is working with, as explained it all, he's getting a lot of bang for the buck. And our bang
Lee McSherry, can you turn up your volume? I can't hear you.
Okay, I think I can.
Did we lose Lee?
Lee, you're muted right now. There you go.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah.
All right. My point is resiliency in small farms. We're relatively speaking a large farm, not as large as some of the people Charles works with, but he's getting great results and only having to talk to 5 or 20 people. And that's really useful for the aquifer. We do use fertilizer. We're just very judicious about it. We tend not to use any organophosphate type pesticides or whatever you call them, the nerve gas ones. We have a pecan grove. We use BT in every few weeks in the summertime to keep the webworms out. We grew alfalfa for 26 years. We used BT in that periodically. We made it for a long time, 20,000 retail sales, 20,000 square bales a year. We had a cattle herd. We have silviculture. We've done other things. We grew corn and sorghum, grain sorghum for that feedlot Luther White had down in Chiefland, all that kind of business. So we've seen a lot of it come and go. But my only answer or response is we need to get more small farms active.
Yes.
We need to get vegetables and fruits and nuts into the market through small farms. You know, the big guys, they can handle the grains and all the large yield type fields where you need big tractors and stuff. But for a small capital investment, you can get a lot of food strategically located small farms. And so if you're talking about global climate change and what we need to do to react to it, you're looking at resiliency. If you're looking at food, you're looking at resiliency being based on a lot of small farms. So, you know, that's pretty much all I have to say. I'll answer questions if anybody's got any, and if I have an answer.
Lee, what do you think is the number one problem or thing that's contributing to the loss of small farms? I think we used to have a lot more small farms than we do now.
Well, it's probably a lot of things. You know, cost of food gets too cheap, or you know, labor goes away. People decide, you know, people put a lot of effort into getting their kids into college and getting them well educated. Well, then they want to go to the city and make big bucks. It's always on a cycle, though. It always comes back. And we just have to leave our options open that when it has to come back, it can come back. So a lot of our small farms, homestead, the people came back to abandon their big city career and say in their late 50s to come back and take care of their 88-year-old mother. And the homestead was still there. I mean, it's a social safety net. It's collateral. It's a hinge of prosperity for a lot of working people and poor people, that they can have, relatively speaking, a comfortable and secure life. And if we can shovel a little bit of money to them for small scale vegetable crops and fruit crops, I think everybody comes out ahead. Did I answer your question?
You did, actually. Absolutely. Yeah.
Lee, sorry.
I just want to make a very brief comment, Lee. So I am really, really grateful and thankful that you advise that it's really important to have a lot of small farms. I'm a biologist and I'm an entomologist, by the way. And so I really like that you also use BT and not a lot of organophosphate pesticides. And with my background, I know that if you have large monocultures, it's really, really easy to have a huge crop loss. So, and that's why small farms are such a great buffer. So I'm really appreciative of this comment. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Lee, could you, out of curiosity, speak to maybe any of the comments I made with regard to pricing of food and how, do you feel like you are disconnected from the price that consumers pay in the store to a large extent? Or do you feel like the way you price your food accurately reflects the costs and the impacts on the land? It sounds like you farm in a very responsible way, so you may be more connected, but is that an impact that you actually see?
Charles Barrett, I believe, said farmers are price takers. We don't set prices. You grow a crop for 3, 5, 6 months, and then you sell it for whoever's got the money to show up and buy it, especially if you're in some kind of commodity production. That's why there's such a thing as crop insurance. And Scott, you have to understand, free market ideals are very nice, but I'll take you to the Old Testament and the tale of Joseph and the Pharaoh. And Joseph had a vision and he told the Pharaoh, you have to build warehouses of grain because you're going to have 7 years of plenty and then you're going to have 7 years of famine and you're required to feed your people. So you got to keep farmers in business to a certain extent. You can't let them all go bankrupt. They're subject to weather. So farmer has a drought year, you're going to let him file for bankruptcy? No, you need that guy. He knows the land. He knows how to get it done. It's not his fault that a drought came or a insect plague that was unanticipated or a late freeze or too much rain at the wrong time. The government has an interest in keeping farmers in business to keep the population going starvation. It can be very seasonable. To propose a simple free market solution is dodging all the serious and complicated questions of keeping a vast population fed. Face it, we live in a technological industrial society, and functionally, I would say we're overpopulated. We need to really be careful about manage farmers and farms.
I mean, so along those lines, and I actually fully agree with you. Like the cost of, and I mean, I think a free market should bear that. Essentially, is the bottom line. Like the free market should absolutely include costing in the price of insurance to support your crops. Now,
very first goat auction in Turkey in the Anatolian Plateau 8,000 years ago. Somebody was rigging the market, whether the local baron was charging taxes or he was letting cheap goats come from the other valley into your market. It's a fiction. And we're trying, but George Hockmuth, Charles Barnett, who are out there fixing the airplane while it's flying, don't need to hear about free markets. They don't exist. We want a market that will feed the people and keep farmers in business. And that's where the real job is. That's where the guys with the figurative wrenches in their back pocket around and trying to keep things going.
I mean, I'll push back a little bit on that, which is it has done a terrible job. The subsidized market for milk has done a terrible job for dairy farms. A huge number of dairy farms have gone out of business specifically because the cost of milk is too low and has been kept too low. So, I mean, that's not completely fair. I mean, the other thing is we walk into a grocery store, and you probably realize this more than most, but you shouldn't be able to buy strawberries dirt cheap in the middle of summer in Florida. That is not when strawberries are produced. And it seems like we have now fallen into a trap of assuming that any food is completely available any time of the year, which is not the way agriculture should be providing food. And so we end up consuming things that are completely fake, I guess, for no other way to put it. I mean, getting lettuce in Florida in the middle of summer from the Imperial Valley in California is not the way that small farms and small farmers would work.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, some guy wants to grow strawberries and somehow get them to you in July, and he can make a profit doing it under the way the current system is constructed. Not my enemy. I mean, I know how the strawberries got there, but well, more power to him, I suppose. I can't see fighting this over vague theological concepts. I'm the guy trying to keep my neighbors in business and myself in business. So I don't see it any other way. Our horizon of planning and economic crop-wise farming growing is 6 months. After that, we don't know anything. Who knows? So we're just trying to make it through a year. And we've been doing it for 46 years, and fine, I'm happy. The system works. So, I'm a practical guy. I like things to work, and then when they're working, I like to see them work better. I grew up in the family of engineers, not philosophers.
That's my background too. Do you feel like the market's working well?
No, there's all sorts of distortions, like the milk. With the milk, it can be cheap, subsidized feed grains, commodity price, the farm bill, which have just ended. Milk can be cheap because you got interstate highways that got built by somebody. You can drive milk 2,000 miles in a refrigerated truck. There's 800 reasons why there's too much milk, or it's too cheap, or it's too expensive. There's no solution. That example, and it's clear as mud to me.
Lee, I was wondering what you thought about like small farms at scale, because for me, I don't, it's not obvious whether having a large farm or a number of small farms that equal the same size of that large farm would be more, I guess, better for the climate. If you have any insight about that.
I think it's better for resiliency.
Yeah.
Something we have to think about as climatic disturbances get worse and worse. Think about our area. The people that are still here in Archer, up at the hospital complex at Shands and the Veterans Hospital, there's like 25,000 jobs up there. A lot of people in Archer drive up Archer Road, and they're technicians, they're x-ray guys, they're blood takers. I mean, there's a million subsets of skilled jobs there, or they're cleaners. Everybody, it's all got to be done. And so all they're looking, suppose you could put an extra $1,000 in somebody's pocket every month from a small market garden they got going in the back, which their kids after school help them with, or their grannies out there helping. They probably know better how to grow things anyway. That to me is the biggest victory you can find. Charles and George are almost big picture guys compared to what I'm thinking about, and Charles and George are saying, no, we're little picture guys. Well, I agree. It's true. I mean, you are little picture guys. You got the wrenches in your back pocket and you're trying to fix the airplane while it's flying. This is great. And that's all we want. We want some resiliency. We want to put a little money in people's pockets and a little more fresh food, especially when it's really needed. in Gainesville or wherever the local town is. I don't, it's not that complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I take your point, and I agree. I think resiliency is very important. I guess I'm just thinking about, you know, the perspective of the conversation being kind of climate change related. Like, is there a way to kind of tie those two things together, or how do you see those two things, the relationship between that, maybe that resiliency or the small farm, the proliferation of small farms, and that working to maybe, how does that fit into the climate change picture, I guess, for you?
It's food resiliency, food supplies. You want to think about the big picture. That's all and we're only giving an opportunity for resiliency. You can't guarantee it. You just don't want to take anything away that might help you get there.
Okay. Yeah.
Over, 300. I think you've given yourself a chance for the future. And other than that, there's not much to be done. Let me veer the topic for 1 second. I'll take 3 minutes of your time and then I'll listen and stop talking. In the 1987, there was a proposal to build a garbage burner out here in Archer at the landfill. It was a bad idea for about 20 different reasons. But one thing they were saying, we're going to burn the garbage and it's stupid beyond belief. We're going to try to fire a boiler with garbage coming in after a 3-day rain. It doesn't make sense. But they brought up they were going to generate electricity. So we had to, as part of our opposition to the project. I went to the Center for Systems. A professor named Barney Capehart was the director. And some of the older people around, George Hockmuth may remember Barney Capehart. The electrical grid was his study area. He was the expert. He was nationally recognized. I said, Barney, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not going to call you. I'm not going to use your name. I just need the answer, and then I can research backwards and supply the argument. I said, okay, ask. I said, using everything we know now.
Lee, you're I don't know if anybody else is having trouble hearing, but I'm having trouble hearing you.
So I asked Barney, I said, Barney, I'm going to ask you one question, and I'm not going to use your name or anything, and then I'll research backwards with your answer. He said, ask the question. I said, knowing what we know in efficiency, conservation, load management, all those types of things, no experiments, what we know works. How much electricity can we squeeze out of the system? He said without hesitation, 50%. That's 50% in 1987. So, I mean, the ability to, and we still need to squeeze 50% electric. So, if you're asking me how to solve it, Barney Capehart knew in 1987, and he was a smart guy. And, and here's Charles and George. They're the Barney Capeharts right now of agriculture, and they know how to do it. And hopefully their project will expand by magnitudes over the next 5 or 10 years. But it's slow, hard work, and nothing ever comes easy. And he's saying he can figure. Charles is saying, okay, I got 5 big farmers now. Maybe I'll have 15 in a few years. I get some money and get some helpers and train some people and do all these things. I mean, that's, to me, tremendous. And that's how it's going to get done. There's no guarantees. We just have to give ourselves room for resiliency. We have to give ourselves a cushion. We can't take away things that we know we'll need someday or we might need. And the farming's the same way.
Bettina?
Yeah, so I just want to give my 2 cents worth about how small farms could contribute to lessening the climate change. To me, small farms means short transportation routes for produce. So the farms, would be focused on local communities. And large farms, a lot of times they ship their stuff all over. So that, that alone is already worthwhile noting, short transportation ways. And if I put my head to it, I know there are many other other ways in which small farms would contribute, lessening the impact on climate change?
I mean, from the standpoint of resiliency, I think Lee is exactly right. Obviously, having things more spread out and, you know, not having one 5,000 acre block, but having 10 500 acre blocks that are separated is definitely better from like catastrophic loss standpoint.
Yes.
I mean, the trick though, Bettina, with what you're saying is if you have 100 small farms instead of one big farm, you're potentially having to, well, you're definitely then having to move supplies to your farms, each one of the farms. So a big part of that cost benefit goes away. I mean, there's a reason that agriculture is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger because the prices are too low for food. And so any cost efficiency you can make, you know, the fact that a big farm can go out and just right away buy the equipment that Charles was talking about, the high drop Y application. I mean, that's the reason big farms are the new norm. You know, it's like dairies being another example from dairies. You know, the average farm size for dairies used to be like 500 head of cattle, and it's now thousands. Like it has gone up an order of magnitude in terms of the size of the farms that are cost efficient. And the small farms end up being a victim of the price fixing that happens in the agricultural market. I fully agree that there needs to be insurance available to farmers, because obviously catastrophic loss events are a huge deal. We have them on our houses, and you know, farmers put everything out in their field every year. You know, imagine setting everything you own out in a field and hoping it doesn't get destroyed over the period of a year. That's what farmers are doing. You know, they take out mortgages to put seeds in the ground, and if they don't grow, they just literally put money out in the field and it burned. So, you know, I mean, I fully agree we need support for farmers. Like, my point with kind of where I was going is we as consumers, like, just to give an example, Lake City didn't spend it. DEP spent it, which means all of the people on this call that live in the state of Florida spent $5 million to do an upgrade for Lake City's wastewater treatment plant to remove nitrogen. And that is an example of nitrogen being put in the ground, and we're having to deal with it after it's essentially on its way into the ground, rather than it not getting put in there in the first place. And if you make it, if people know what something costs before they use it, they are more likely to adjust their behavior to actually using it in a responsible way. And that's my concern with the way agriculture is currently run. And I fully understand, I get the, you know, concerns over variability in weather and things like that. But, you know, and maybe a free market is not quite right. Maybe it's a semi-controlled market, but the way that we buy things now does not make any sense. I have no idea when I go to the store if it was a good year or a bad year from a crop standpoint, because I could buy strawberries in July or January or February or April. I don't know if it was a good year or a bad year. So that's we as consumers have some responsibility to the farmers that produce our food, and we cannot realize that because we have no idea what the farmers are dealing with. Like, I could go and buy collard greens any time of the year I want for about the same price, and that doesn't make any sense.
Well, so I guess, you know, a lot of people have already addressed this, but it seems like climate change really is also a philosophical question, because we need to change our way of life for sure. But I don't know, you know, if we can address this question in our community conversations.
This is Lee. Collard greens, you can buy them all year round because they grow all year round around here. I got some in my garden right now. I'm thought I'd harvest them today, but I think I'll leave them till Friday.
They should be good after a cold snap.
Yeah. Well, I think that, just based on the conversations we've had tonight, that we have a good start to what could be a community conversation at large. So, I do like Scott's point, and if there's anybody, Scott or anybody else that you think could represent that point of view on the panel, that would be, I think, an important perspective to have. And yeah, so I think we could probably move on to the next part of the agenda, which we don't have anything other than the EPD briefing
Isha
points
has
and whatnot, but David,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have Leslie Straub from the Wildlife Care Center here to talk to us about something. I think it has to do with the newly named Tuscaloosa Park, but but I'll let her speak on that.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah,
So,
Leslie, why don't you give us a quick breakdown? We need 15 minutes at least at the end of this to take care of our other business, but give us a 15-minute, up to 15-minute presentation and question and answer period for us as well.
Can we just say a quick thank you to Lee also for presenting?
No, definitely.
oh yeah,
Yes,
of course.
was
Thank you so much.
wonderful.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Leslie Straub, Director of Florida Wildlife Care, and I am also the president of the Friends of Cuscawilla Friends Group, which was recently formed. And the Cuscawilla Outdoor Learning Center, pretty much is what we're calling it, is the old Camp McConnell property that the county has retained and is developing. And one of the things that there's a lot of pressure from a lot of different groups that are, want this and want that, and things that I'm sure eventually we will incorporate and use the property for. But I think there's two things that I wanted to kind of emphasize. One, there really needs to be a kind of a strategic plan for a long-term vision for the property, so that as we do the development and planning for it, that kind of keeps us on track and makes it an efficient way of developing the property, and that it meets the needs of the community. I did a needs assessment for the county that incorporates not only environmental education, but social, health and well-being, professional, recreational, all of that could be really benefit from utilizing that property because of its nature-based outdoor type influence. And so that's one thing that I think would be really important. And as they're starting to do stuff on the property, there really needs to be a kind of acceptable use carrying capacity type thing for certain activities, so that we don't damage the property and we have kind of an overall view of what it will sustain. And I sit on the Nature Centers Commission for the city of Gainesville as well. And we did this for Morningside because, it's just a very small park and a lot of big groups wanted to utilize it. And we came up with a acceptable use type of policy. So those are the two things that I wanted to bring up. And with your group, I think the the acceptable use and carrying capacity of the property to maintain that the natural areas, you know, and but still be able to utilize the built areas that for the purposes of what they want to do with the property. So I wanted to just put that out there for the group.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. We talked about, I talked with Leslie quite a bit today about this, and I think she has a lot of good ideas and a good point to make in that, you know, you can't have, you know, the leasing out or use of the property by, you know, 40,000 people or something like that, because it's going to destroy it. So you need to say how many people, you know, can reasonably we have on the property for an event without hurting it and damaging it, and then, of course, then that makes it available for all the really kind of good projects. She, you know, read me down a list of number of great kind of project ideas that she had for that. What I recommended to Leslie was that she go ahead and put together her strategic, you know, a plan and an analysis of, you know, how she thought, you know, was best for it, and that we then submit that to EPD for their comments and analysis as well. And then that we get that document back after that for, you know, our you know, looking at, and assuming that, you know, it's a practical thing that we agree with, you know, that we think the county should move forward with, then that we can go ahead and submit it to, you know, the county along with our recommendation. So that's basically where I'm coming from on it. Bruce?
Yeah, Bruce.
Yes, I think, hi, Leslie.
Hi.
I think the one thing that wants to be carried out is the vision of the county when they purchased the property. They purchased the property to be a nature camp and education center. And I think that's what the county envisions as the main use of it. But I think with all of the upgrades and things that are being done to it, it's going to be able to be used more year round for various things than just a summer camp, which is good. But there's as Leslie says, there's a lot of planning that has to go into it because a lot of people would like it for a lot of purposes. And it wasn't envisioned as a local park. It was envisioned as a nature camp and education center. Thank you.
Yeah, one final comment for me. You know, I remember when we first looked at this property, and I remember thinking that, gee, you know, I just assumed the county didn't sell it. It was such a beautiful, you know, property and had so many really positive features on it. And it would really be nice if the county could manage it. But, you know, they need to find a way to make money off it too. I mean, or at least, you know, at least to pay for the whatever, you know, expenses of upkeeping are going to be. And it's probably not going to be small with all the, you know, the building changes that need to be made and all that. So that needs to be considered as well. But I'm really glad in a way that, you know, everything is kind of following through and that the county is going to be keeping the property rather than selling it outright. Although I'm sure that's not what the county originally wanted either. They kind of, you know, they wanted to sell it if they could to someone to use as a camp and, you know, and that sort of thing. But now that it's back in the county's hands, you know, I think this gives us the opportunity to at least help them direct, you know, doing it the right way. And that's what I see this plan, this idea of a strategic plan comes from. And I can't think of anyone better than Leslie to, you know, to put it together, because she's obviously done a lot of thinking on this and has a lot of care about it, and really, you know, she also sees quite a few applications of the park, which are really, really cool. So, and Bruce, you sit on the same board as Leslie does, right? I mean, this or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come before your board.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leslie. And yeah, I think we'll look forward to reviewing whatever your strategic, the strategic plan you come up with, and if we can offer you any sort of advice or valuable discussion, then that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So are there any staff briefing notes, Mark?
Nothing new, just to kind of tag on to Leslie's comments. I think I agree that it's probably a good idea, and I think it was Bruce that prepare something. I know so far the efforts for the county have been towards getting it open for summer camp. So beyond that, I don't know that since that's been the priority, that the other aspects of it have not been fleshed out. So, so yeah, anything that y'all could provide to the board and to manage through the park, Lathrop Conservation Forever, ACF, that would be good.
Is, I don't know, maybe this is a naive question. Is there a reason that Leslie would have to go through us to
No,
the EPD? She could just give it directly to you?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it could come direct to us and then we could present to, just give it to the board, or she could submit direct to board and it comes, then board will just, pass it on to EPD and ACF to comment on. So either way.
Okay, so she could do a variety
Yeah.
of ways.
Yeah, we'd get it back either way because, the normal route for this would be that, it would come in, someone may go to the board and say, gee, I've got this. And the board's going to say, okay, well, here, EPD, why don't you take a look at it? And when EPD is done, they give it back to the board. Then the board says, okay, well, before we go any farther, let's give this to a few of our, our committees to look at, and then we'd get it then. So the only thing I did was I offered to Leslie the opportunity to pass it by us, first opportunity. I made sure that she understood that she didn't have to go that route with it if she wants to, just so that we could give her some feedback on it before it gets turned in. But I did say that I wanted it to go through EPD first, at least.
Gotcha. Okay. Does anybody have anything that they want to include in the next workshop or other comments, upcoming events, anything like that? I had a question, Mark. You had attached the new commissioner orientation PDFs with our agenda.
Yeah, it was just for informational purposes in case, some committee members not be aware of some of the various services that ACF or EPD provide. So it's nothing, it was just for informational purposes. And
Okay, so this is the presentation that EPD gave to the new commissioners,
yes,
more or less. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I was thinking on the issue of resiliency in agriculture and all of that. I mean, it might be kind of taking us on a tangent to go this way, but Anna Prizia, the newly elected commissioner, Prizia, I know she's worked a lot on that issue. So I don't know if that's something that we want to, fold into our community conversation, or maybe at some point, extend a conversation to deal with that. She's somebody we could potentially talk to.
that's a good comment. In fact, we've received comments just this past week that if there are groups, and it could be public, private, that want any of the board members to be, included in discussions, then just let us know and we can pass it on to their individual staff, the individual, if there's certain members you want. And as y'all know, Mary Alford was previously on EPAC, so she's obviously familiar with your role for the committee, and both of them in the presentations were very supportive of EPD and ACF's efforts. And but yes, I think the idea of bringing them in terms of resiliency and sustainability issues, they both have, obviously they're both very interested in that. So
Maybe we can invite Anna then to attend our next meeting, and we can, ask her some questions and, and get her to participate in our conversation. I think that one of the things we do need to do before we leave tonight is to decide where we're going to go in our next meeting. When is our next meeting going to be, or are we going to skip the idea of having a meeting in between this, a subcommittee meeting, or in between this meeting and the next full regular meeting in March, since we only have one more regular meeting before we're going to want to have the community conversation. So we have to have things finalized by the end of next meeting. And you know, do we want to review what we have in place today and say, well, where do we need to go from here to get to where we all feel comfortable, you know, actually scheduling a meeting room, et cetera. So, and yes, Scott, we read it. It comes right on the screen. So.
Yeah, Elaine made a comment, just to make sure everybody saw it, for the community conversation, shouldn't we have a section on the future of ag? How will crops be grown in the future? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea. Scott, I think so as well. And in terms of, I mean, fleshing out the conversation and getting everything ready, I mean, April was a target date, but not necessarily the date, right? So if it needs more time, then I think that's okay. But I, you know, having a date set or having a date that we're aiming for, I think kind of puts everybody, you know, in a more focused mind to like think about how much we have left to do on it and get things in order quicker. In terms of that, I mean, do we, like last time we had like kind of a bit of homework for different people that were going to reach out to potential speakers and whatnot. You know, it sounds like maybe we want to expand the panel to include somebody that can present, you know, the perspective that Scott was discussing. And then, you know, maybe what Elaine just mentioned about the future of agriculture. There could be somebody that could potentially speak on that. So do we want to do another round of like maybe reaching out to people or just coming up with another few candidates that we might want to include in the conversation? And then if it makes sense to have a subcommittee meeting to kind of check on that.
For what it's worth, I did have at least one other farmer who was, because I had said last meeting that I would talk to Charles Shin to find farmers, you know, that would come talk to us. And then I realized that I know several, so you know, it was better just to go to them. And I thought that Lee was one example of someone who, since he's been on EPAC, really would have a much better, a broader view, you know, of things than we might get. And then also I found that John Nix, who is a member of the CCAC, the Citizens Climate Change Committee. He is, excuse me, he is a farmer. Okay, he works for the county school system, but he's also a farmer. And so I had asked him to come. He had said yes, but then I haven't been able to get a hold of him since then and now. But I will, I'm sure, run into him the third Tuesday of this month at the NAACP ECJC meeting, and I'll touch base with him again then and see if, you know, see if he can come next month to talk to us. So I didn't press the issue once Lee agreed to come, because I realized then that, you know, that would fill up our time slot anyway.
Yeah.
But that's, for me, is, you know, that takes care of the farmer aspect of it. I think that Charles was just an excellent choice, George. He seems to have a really great idea, you know, and an understanding of, you know, what needs to be done from that standpoint. And, you know, part of my question is how does all this relate to just climate change, and how can we get more done on the climate change front? And have we really, you know, answered all the questions we want to regarding ag? You know, resiliency was what, you know, Lee brought up, and I thought that was a great point, you know. And what I didn't realize before he spoke was that we need both small and large farms, obviously. Larger farms keep prices down reasonably because they keep production up, and it's easier to get things to, you know, to market with less, you know, less trucks and less, you know, therefore on the road, and probably less, you know, carbon being put out from that. And at the same time, we need, for resiliency, we need more small farms. I was aware we needed the small farms, but, you know, I was thinking get rid of the huge ones, but no, it sounds like we need both of them to some extent. And so that takes part. So what are we missing here? Scott, what do you think?
I mean, maybe somebody from a legal or,
I don't necessarily feel, I mean, I enjoyed both, both of the presentations tonight. My comments were obviously not well received by Lee, which is fine. So, that's,
I'm okay with it.
that's nothing new. I don't think we actually have anyone, unless I'm misunderstanding who we have, I don't think we have anyone that's speaking to climate change at all.
yeah, I mean, there was the one from the Alachua Conservation Trust who didn't come tonight. I don't know
Town cat.
if they were more of a climate change person.
No, that wouldn't be, they're just, Tom would just give a presentation on their efforts on purchasing conservation easements on public lands. When I talked to him, it was not really specific to climate change issues. It's just their efforts towards what, you know, the
Yeah.
big picture, kind of like what Dr. Barrett, you know, with his presentation. It's like, you know, he's doing what he can do with what he has available now. And, you know, the big picture approach, I don't know to what degree either one of them is what, I don't know if that's, you know, going back to Scott's comment, was what he was envisioning for the presentation, but
I mean, I'm wishing in hindsight, I'm wishing I would have asked Lee what if, I don't know if they have children, but I would be curious to know if they think
That they
that their
do.
grandchildren are going to be doing this in 30 years.
Mhm.
And I would bet they'd probably say yes, but they probably don't believe that. So, I mean, agriculture is not a great profession. There's a reason that people that are in ag right now, the average age is in the 60s or 70s. Like it's not a good industry. And so while there are people that are managing to eke it out, like giant conglomerate, massive farms are the only ones that are profitable in a significant, sustainable way. Like, yeah, there's the small occasional organic growers, but those are the exception, not the rule. I mean, you know, if you follow the news and the massive suicide epidemic that's happening in dairy farms in the Midwest, and the problems in ag are huge. And so the system's not working. And, you know, that's that's why I didn't hesitate to push back. But, you know, it's more like we're it's more like Charles and George are trying to fix the Titanic with a roll of Scotch tape. Like it's a bigger problem. It's not an airplane that they're working on that's still flying. It's a boat that's sinking, and they don't have the tools they need. So, you know, yeah.
I wonder if where we're going with the community conversation, if stepping back from the big picture climate issue, and if the people we're trying to educate and bring along, I guess I'm thinking in my mind, is it more important to educate them about where agriculture is right now, with some of the issues and what people are trying to do? Because I would hazard to guess that 95% or more of the audience individuals have no clue about what farmers are doing, even in the Swanee and Santa Fe basin. And maybe, you know, maybe we're trying to do too many things and mixing really big picture issues and smaller, medium-sized issues into one community conversation. But I guess I'm thinking that maybe it would be interesting and useful and instructive for people to hear some of the issues that farmers deal with. Maybe there's another speaker that can deal with some of these sort of economic, you know, societal type issues that farmers deal with that make them make certain decisions. I'm sure there must be an ag economist at UF that could speak about that. And then since we're interested in the environment, and assumedly the audience would be interested in it, that's where Charles could come in and say, hey, here's the things that farmers are dealing with as far as the BMAP and the rules and so forth that they have to meet. And oh, by the way, you voters are the ones that are, on the one hand, asking for cheap food, but on the other hand, you're being hypocrites and asking the farmers to spend to clean up the environment. And maybe it would be interesting to show the audience through Charles and others what farmers are trying to accomplish. And then maybe somewhere down the road, you put all of this into a much bigger, big umbrella presentation or community conversation about climate change and why it's important. The last time you guys learned what farmers are struggling with and what we're doing on a small scale, and ask the big question, is that going to be enough? Because here's what we have to meet as far as the climate goes.
George, I think that's a perfect narrative. You've hit the nail on the head by first presenting what is reachable, what is already working, things presented by Charles Barrett, and also having a progressive, intelligent farmer and his wife, both farmers, giving the real-time practical sharing their experiences, having them explain that they understand the more complex concepts, but that there are certain practical realities. And once that is all presented, as you suggest, coming back with another community conversation that gets more abstract, more philosophical, and probes the fundamental flaws of the existing system we're complaining about, that Scott is addressing and others address in similar ways. But I think the idea of first dealing with things that are working in an elegantly simple way, the way Charles is showing these new techniques that are cost effective and really saving on improving in water quality. I think that's a great idea.
But, oh, sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
I've had a feeling this evening that I stepped into the wrong meeting. I thought I was attending a meeting on a conversation about climate change, but I seem to have stepped into an agriculture meeting. Are we going to go back to climate change?
What we set out to do really was to discuss. Yeah, I'm sorry. What we set out to do was to discuss the problems that agriculture has relative to climate change, and to discuss the problems that we have overall with as agriculture as part of our system. But I think for what it's worth, this has raised a lot of new questions for me tonight, and I'm not at all averse to having a community conversation that leaves more questions than it answers. Okay, because it doesn't hurt to have people saying, well, gee, I didn't know that there were all these things that that we don't know how to do yet. And let's face it, we don't.
Yeah, I think, as soon as you start to have a substantive conversation and consider something in more detail, it necessarily gets a narrower focus. And, I think that's going to continue to happen each time we kind of come in with this idea of presenting something about blank and climate change. Is it necessarily kind of starts to get more narrow as we talk to an individual and their individual research and their individual experiences and whatever. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I think that, that's just, a meaningful conversation that's kind of how they end up going. But yeah, I like George's idea too, of maybe doing it in two parts. My only concern is I I don't want the first part to look like, to be missing maybe a little bit of perspective. Like I maybe a teaser into part 2 or something like that. Yes, Scott.
So I mean, my concern, and you know, we've had Charles Shin as part of previous community conversations we've done. My concern is and don't take this the wrong way, George. I'm a bit tired of the like agricultural sob stories. We have it so hard. Oh, you know, we're barely getting by. Yeah, that may be true for some farmers. A large number of them have very significant assets in the form of property, if nothing else. And the bottom line is, if someone goes and does a $100,000 irrigation upgrade on their farm, I think the cost share is 75% is not out of their pocket and 25% is, which means the other $75,000 is coming from the people on this call that live in that water management district. And so, you know, I get, and the only way you can save 200 million gallons of water a year is if you're using more than 200 million gallons. So I'm a little bit tired of like the victimhood of the farmer here. Yes, farmers do have it rough. A big part of the reason they have it rough is because no one knows where their food actually comes from. And so like I feel like we're beating around the bush here a little bit. Yes, the work that Charles presented tonight, great work, absolutely great work. It is not going to solve our problems. It's barely nibbling around the edges. I mean, he would have to go and do that on every single farm to have a significant benefit, and even then it's not enough. Like, and that's the bottom line. And the other thing is, like, you know, he did present a number of, oh, you know, we didn't put down 250,000 pounds of nitrogen at the surface. DEP does not calculate 250,000 pounds in the BMAP as at the surface. They take a very significant attenuation on that moving into groundwater. George probably knows what it is, but I think it's greater than 50% attenuation they assume between the surface and groundwater. So
I think it's even more than that.
it may be as high as 90. I don't remember
It might
exactly.
be. I think the number is 70 or 80, Scott.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's, once again, great project, absolutely great project. I don't fault any of that. That being said, like, if we're talking about climate change, an individual farmer or even someone that represents farming interests is probably not the most valuable viewpoint. Just because you know, they're focused on they're focused on the small pieces. You know, and yes, 200 million gallons is a lot, but that's small potatoes in the grand scheme of our problems. So I mean, that's my concern, and I'm frustrated for the same reason I'm always frustrated, which is like we're about to go off the cliff. All of the research indicates that, you know, we are about to go off the cliff with climate change, and we're like thinking about maybe putting on our hazard lights before we start pumping the brakes. Like, our actions are so inadequate for our problems that it's extremely upsetting and frustrating.
So Scott, so give us a better way to proceed at this point in time towards our having a more meaningful community conversation.
I think we need to probably go and find, I'm sure there is a university professor somewhere. I have not gone and looked, but I'm sure there is someone, a professor or someone at one of these climate change organizations that is specifically evaluating agriculture. And yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense to have, you know, Charles speak about what is being done now. I actually like Nisha's idea of having it broken up where we have, this is what's happening now, but I think we're squandering an opportunity if we do not have someone that can really speak to the scale of the problem and the significance of the changes we need to make.
Well, I don't think Charles would be averse to participating in a panel discussion that, because as he said, you know, he's trying to work with what he has right now, with the scenario that he has right now. And I'll step back 2 decades. Like I said, I sat in the DEP building in Tallahassee with about 10 other people. And this was in 1994 or 1995, and set up the original group of people, just like what's the Swanee Partnership is now. It was called the Swanee River Nutrient Management Working Group or something or other. And they shortened the name to call it the partnership. So that was 20 years ago. And I spent a large part of my career, in fact, most of it, running around the state, just like Charles is doing now. He's got more technology than I had back then, but spent my career running around working on farms, showing farmers how to reduce the amount of fertilizer. And it's been going on for even before me. So it's been a long, arduous process just to get to where we are now. And if you look at the environmental impact that these programs have had over 20 years, I would say it's probably minimal. Now he's got a better chance because it wasn't too far into my career. I realized because I would go out and I'd put a fertilizer trial on a farm showing different rates of fertilizer, and son of a gun, a lot of times we lost. And we knew that the research said the farmer could get by just fine with that amount of fertilizer. But what we soon learned was that we weren't controlling the irrigation, and the farmer just was over irrigating. So that's why they over fertilized. And so that's why it says at the end of my emails that if we teach farmers how to manage water, we can teach them better how to manage fertilizer. Doesn't mean we will. There's still a lot of human nature in there, and farmers, just like Charles said, they have such a slim profit margin, and these inputs are so cheap. Why not put on more? And it's hard to get them off of those habits. It hasn't happened in the Swanee River in 20 years. And I don't know that, like Scott says, I'm very suspicious. I developed a rather bad name in agriculture for trying to push the research and reducing inputs on agriculture around the state. And I don't know what the answer is. I think Kelly told us that they have to get the farmers buy-in. They have to basically be friends with the farmers, and it's real tough to move the needle on this issue. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that for us, it seems to me to make sense to bring the audience into this problem, because I don't think the audience understands the issues. I don't think they understand what a BMAP is. I don't think they understand. They hear in the popular literature about all the pollution and the algae growth and everything, but I don't think they understand the issue. And I don't think they understand agriculture's role in it and the demands being made on agriculture. But I don't have a problem with bringing in somebody that can speak to sort of some of those who doesn't have a dog on the porch, so to speak, about agriculture. And so Charles, I don't think, would be offended by that, because he knows he's doing what he can do with what he's been given. And if somebody else comes in and sort of sets the stage on how tough it is, I think that might be a good approach. And then Charles can come in and say, hey, look, we've been given some funding, and we're trying to do the best we can. We've got some farmers that are interested in this, and see what we're doing. And then maybe somebody else can speak about the small farm, large farm thing. But it's like pulling a string on on a sweater, you pull and you pull, and pretty soon, it pulls the whole garment apart.
And by the way, I think just as a comment, the BMAPs are totally insufficient. Okay, I think I've seen evidence that the BMAPs are put together in a very non-holistic manner. They're just really do not represent the truth of how much nutrients we need to get out of the environment. So just
David, I'll even go one step further. Maybe Scott knows better than I do, but when I saw the last Swanee BMAP presentation, I understood, and I even asked the fellow from DEP, the numbers that they use in formulating the inputs that farmers are using come from the IFAS recommendations. I don't think the BMAPs are based on what actually farmers are putting out. And I pointed that out to him, and he says, well, that's the best we can do, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, do you realize that the farmers put out lots more fertilizer than the IFAS recommendations? So that blows up your BMAP.
Okay, that's important. And by the way, conflict in these community conversations, just friendly discussions between people whose ideas don't necessarily jive very well, that's fine. I think, because that exists now in the community at large. I think I'm not afraid of having that show up either. This isn't all a bunch of people getting together and saying we have a nice, easy, friendly solution, because there is no nice, easy, friendly solution to climate change.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. I was surprised. I liked the presentation that Charles did, but I was surprised at the presentation of Charles and the farmers that did not tie in anything to do with climate change. They didn't talk about how climate change is affecting how they farm now, if they're adapting to doing something. It was nothing to do with that. It was a completely different discussion. And I think there was a good opening there to bring climate change into the farm, because the farms are being affected by climate change. What the discussion was more on is more environmental best practices and cutting down on nitrogen and water, but not climate change.
Bruce, I think that's a very perceptive of you. And I mean, I think Lee actually specifically spoke to that in one sense, which is he said farmers think, no more than 6 months ahead. That's all they think ahead. They think about this growing season, I mean, it's a problem. It's absolutely a problem. And given the uncertainty, I don't think there's any way they can plan for the future. And that's why I'm not sure if that scale is sufficient in the climate change context. Like, I think we probably need someone that thinks about this at a much larger scale, like global scale or American scale, North America, like someone that's looking at all of North America and potential changes in weather patterns, because I would imagine what the global climate models show is that you are going to have some regions that currently we rely on for a huge amount of food production that are essentially going to become completely non-productive. Like you will have dry conditions, they will drain whatever aquifers they sit on, and the land will just, it won't produce at a level that is, can provide based on rainfall alone.
Scott, what is it that specifically, if you can imagine for us, what you would conceive as the ideal earth scientist could present to reveal to the listening audience? Because I can tell you that one of the last guy that we had here for the previous community conversation was a true Earth, a NASA global scientist on atmospherics and their impact. And he was hired by Obama. He was the only one hired specifically for that application. And that is namely Mark Kramer. And I'm not sure we utilized him to his full potential. And it's possible that maybe I should contact him, and if group-wise, you can come up with some questions that I can present him to prompt him to say, okay, show me what you got. What can you give us? But I need to know what to ask him specifically. You get what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I mean, Nisha, you can definitely jump in here whenever you want. I based on me coming in and throwing a hand grenade like I might have done tonight, and making sure that we didn't finish this meeting earlier than the last meeting. I would I think there would be value. April seems soon, unless there's a lot of interim meetings, and I think Nisha already hinted at that. I think there would be value to working on developing, for each of us to put together 2 or 3 questions about maybe climate and agriculture and circulate those. Because I mean, I don't think I'm the person, I don't think I can write them all probably.
Well, I was just trying to, you made a very clear, direct, that you were very justifiably frustrated with the fact that no one is really going for big pictures, the giant moves that have to be made. And I agree with, they have to be made. But in order to get someone to talk about them, it would help to have all of us to come up with questions that I can say, can you talk about this? Do you know someone, Mark, who can talk about it if you can't talk about this? Because he at least is a NASA trained, or he did his postdoc at NASA. So he's familiar with the kinds of questions or answers that you would seek. He may not have the answers, but at least he might know someone I can reach out to, or any of us.
When you said each of us to come up with 2 questions and circulate, what does that mean? What did you mean by that?
So I'm thinking we each come up with our maybe 2 or 3 top questions. And we've done this kind of before, I think, for some of the other community conversations. Then we can email them to Mark and he can circulate them. But to the group internally, and then we can, and maybe it's just me, but I guess I don't see the firm outlines of the community conversation here.
Right. Yeah, and if it so that would be a stage before reaching out to maybe Mark Kramer, where we just kind of recognize what our conversation should be about, and get a more firm grip on that. And then if it makes sense to reach out to Mark and ask and have a directed focus for him.
Yeah.
And see if that's something he can address. I like that. David.
Yeah, I want to make a slightly different suggestion, and that's that we do the questions, okay? But at the same time, George, go ahead and contact Mark. In the past, I found that the guys that, if we've got the right guy and we're talking to the right guy, they know the questions that need to be asked that you're not asking or I'm not asking. And, you can say, well, what questions aren't we asking to get to where we need to go with this, okay? And then you say, well, there's this and there's this and there's this. And sometimes they don't bring them up on their own because they kind of, they're in the business of helping you solve your problem. But, if you're not saying, here's where I need to get to and how do I get there, then they're not going to be able to solve that problem for us. So let's try that. And I think Mark is very, very approachable person, when he's available.
Well, David, one of the things that I noticed, the things that he presented were, you could say, his pet projects. I mean, he did a narrative about what he's doing from an agriculture perspective, but his studies, he's a soil geochemist. He can get very theoretical about carbon sequestration. His research papers on that subject are there. So the thing is, we have to get him away from his pet projects and get him to sort of shape what we want from him.
George?
If we ask him he has this resource in his head. If we can ask him the right questions, we might get what we're after.
George, why don't you contact him, okay, and ask him, tell him, where we're at with this, and ask him if he can make the transition, help us make the transition from where we're at to, what we're just now talking about, making this more of a climate change discussion, but, that has the agricultural component in it, and ask us how he thinks we can get to there from where we're at right now. Because that's the important part. I mean, and ag is important, talking about what's going on in ag is important, but at the same time, it's not going to get us where we need to go,
So that's why I asked Scott, and I ask all of you, in order to get him to think, to aim his sight, set his goals in the right direction, to go from what we talked about with agriculture, even back when he talked about agriculture and what he was doing in Oregon. What is it I should be asking him? Yes, we want something that's more, global in perspective? That's too vague.
Yeah, I think, David, I think it would be helpful to have some of our questions formulated in a more explicit way. And I mean, I think we should have a very tight timeline for that. Like if everyone can turn them around within a week or two, I think there's no reason that these couldn't circulate very easily before the next meeting.
Yeah.
And
Can we set up an interim meeting for like 2 weeks from today plus 1 day, so it's not on a Tuesday, it's on a Wednesday? And this time, all of us make it to it.
Yeah. Now, if we come up with these questions, I don't know how you feel. If you forward them to Mark with your agreement, I can forward those questions to Mark Kramer and see what his response is. Does that sound right? Does that sound good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that. One is I'm sure, and then the other is if we're having a meeting in 2 weeks, if we're going to do a subcommittee meeting, that might be an opportunity for us to look at all of those questions and decide a more focused kind of subset of them, or that we want to then pose to Mark.
So 2 weeks from now at the subcommittee meeting, we discuss the questions.
Yeah, make sure that, because I mean, we might all be kind of on slightly different pages in terms of what we think this conversation should be about or is about. And we can kind of get a better consensus and do our own kind of thinking in light of this workshop, kind of where we think it should go. And I think maybe, the subcommittee meeting, we can firm it up and you can then reach out to Mark.
I'm wondering if we try to submit something within a week, and for all of us to read what has just been presented, a week from now, and say, oh, this is not quite in the right direction, let's fine tune it. It seems like it might be an advantage to try to come up with questions. Maybe it may be a little hasty, but to come up with some for next week, discuss them, get some consensus. Are we in the right direction here? Let's keep on going in that direction, or let's change it. And then the second week, really distill down what we think is the approach. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a limited amount of discussion that we can have with each other, though, without calling a meeting. But
We could declare a short meeting where the meeting is over in 30 minutes, no matter what.
Yeah, something, or even shorter, possibly.
Yeah, 15 minutes, whatever. I mean, just to review the questions and say.
I'm
okay,
so skeptical of us having a 15-minute meeting.
I am too, but I mean, that's why I hesitated to make that.
I guess I'm sort of splitting my attention here, listening to you guys, and also sort of searching here online. I guess I keep coming back to the idea of, don't we have some of this kind of expertise right here on campus? It sounds like a lot of work to go around and around with making up questions and then getting with Mark, and if he doesn't respond in a timely fashion, and then
I gotta admit, George, I was thinking the same thing. In fact, that's what I was gonna do tomorrow. There is a section over there that, I mean, that's their primary role is sustainability. And it's a think tank group. I've seen it advertised,
Well, there's something
but I don't
called,
know if there are any ag related.
well, I think it's going to take a little more searching. Surely their faculty fellows, I'm talking about the Florida Climate Institute.
That's
Oh.
it. That's
It's a
it.
consortium of universities in this state, including UF. It's FAU, Florida Institute of Technology, FIU, Florida State, University of Central Florida, University of Miami, University of South Florida. Now, in just kind of quickly looking through some of the publications and stuff, nothing really has jumped out at me about agriculture, but daggone it, they've got a couple IPAS people as their faculty fellows, one of which we had on the program, Scott Phrase. And so I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, if we haven't built the right machine yet with where we've gone with the Swanee partnership. And again, I go back to it was just a question that people asked, do we have any programs going on for agriculture? And I mentioned the Swanee partnership. If that's not enough and we need to go bigger and grander, then I would say, let's take a look at some of the possibilities from UF. And
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we went to Mark Kramer because he gave such a strong presentation, you know, and was really, you know, very, very direct and really kind of answered a lot of questions in the area in which he spoke upon, at least. So I think that's why I went back to, because by the way, before George spoke up, I was going to say, George, what do you think about getting Mark Kramer? So
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I was really impressed with Mark's presentation and, you know, his general ideas on how to proceed in terms of, you know, getting ag and climate change, you know, fixes. So,
Well,
he's a good guy and he knows a lot, and I'm sure he would, you know, generally big picture be willing to help. But again, you know, he's out there doing his thing and we're here trying to do our thing. And I guess I just have a little bit of a underlying problem with going back to same person to help us when we should have the expertise and the people right here in town.
That's a good point.
You know, there's also the Governor Ron DeSantis announced Dr. Julia Nishawat as Florida's first chief resilient officer. I don't know.
She left. She already left.
I was going to say, I don't know if this website is up to date here.
Yeah. I saw a presentation by her and it was fantastic. But I believe she left.
Well, maybe somebody knows where she went. If she gave a good,
I think she went to the federal government under Trump, and I would imagine she's no longer there. I don't know.
Well, she's probably got better things to do than that. We could get a hold of her maybe, but
Yeah.
anyway, just to make the point that maybe we ought to look closer to home. Maybe there's somebody at FIU or FAU or somewhere, something like that.
give me some names, George. I'll talk to people. I mean, you know,
Well, just go to that website. They got a whole bunch of faculty fellows.
Florida Climate Institute.
Florida Climate Institute. To be honest with you, I'm a little bit concerned because I just wonder how up to date the darn website is here. Because their last, let me see if I can get it here. Their faculty fellows, the last ones that they list were from 2018. So they haven't had any 2019. They haven't had any 2020 faculty fellows posted on their website. Shame on them.
Well, why don't we see what we can do? I mean, you know, if we get a quick response from Mark, we can at least ask him some questions and you know, get some advice from him. At the same time, we can try and contact some people locally to you know, that can help us, and you know, just go from there, and then submit our own questions and meet, you know, in what, 1 or 2 weeks, however we want to do it moving forward. Just let's go ahead and make something. And we've been here 2.5 hours already. I'm starting to get a little stiff necked from sitting here, so.
Yeah, I think we all
others
kind
are also a little antsy, and Mark might want to get back to his license.
So what, 2 weeks in a day or something around then for a subcommittee meeting?
Yeah, that works for me, I think.
That would be the
17th.
Correct.
I mean, I can probably make it if it's short. Right now I have kids that are up quite a bit after their bedtime. So-
Okay.
Fine, sure.
So what time you want to shoot for?
I guess 6, 5, what works for people?
6.
6?
Good.
Okay.
So Tuesday, 2 weeks from now.
Wednesday. The
Wednesday,
17th.
the 17th.
Wednesday, 2 weeks from now. At 6. Okay.
Wednesday, the 17th.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I do also like Scott's idea of coming up with questions and submitting them. I mean, I think that'll help us all individually kind of get clearer about what we want the conversation to be about and check in and see if we're all on the same page. And then if anybody feels like reaching out to somebody or coming up with more potential names for speakers in the interim.
Did you say 16 or 17?
The 17th.
Oh, that's terrible. That's St. Patrick's Day. We'll be out drinking our green beer.
Hopefully you won't be out. You can drink it at home.
Hey, you can do it. You can drink right there in front of us. We won't tell anyone. Looks like you're
Now
still.
that I'm out, I'm never going back.
It looks like you're still in your old room, by the way. That's not your new place, is it?
No, not yet. It hasn't come up yet.
I thought.
So I'm still sorting out.
Okay, so we're all set.
I think so. All right. Well, thanks for
Thank you,
sticking
guys.
around, everyone.
And I will apologize for coming back and creating complications like I tend to do.
It's all your fault.
Yeah, I blame Scott for all of it.
I'll try to miss the next couple of meetings to simplify things.
Yeah, you need to be punished by having to come back to the meetings.
All right, guys. Have a great evening.
Okay.
You too. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.